I'm going to run you through some quick steps for using the X-Rite Color Checker, both the full-size Color Checker, this is the video version, and I'm also going to have a quick look at the Passport version, which gives you basically the same information with an additional focus checker in a nice handy hard shell for carrying around with you, slipping in a pocket. No excuse not to have it with you when you've got one that size as well. What we're going to talk about first of all is white balancing with these charts. This is a spectrally flat grey. Now what that means is as the light hits it, all frequencies are reflected from it. So in other words, it doesn't absorb any frequencies of light as it gets hit. So you get an accurate interpretation of the colour that's hitting your subject. And in fact, that's the second point. It should be where your subject is. I'm the subject for this, so it's where I am. It can be very tempting to move these right over to where the camera is, but the light over there is completely different from the light here. There's a couple of different tricks that you can use to balance this, both in camera and once you get back home and in your edit suite. So we're going to look at how we can do that in post in a later part of this video. But right now, a quick tip for in camera. You can manually adjust your white balance in pretty much any camera. You can set the Kelvin to pretty much where you want it to be. But I prefer to take samples and do a manual balance. You point it at a grey target and you tell it to sample from that. The focus side of this, by the way, is pretty straightforward. Stick it where your subject is. If it's a person, I'd always recommend focusing on their eyes, so it's a good idea to have this right next to their face so that you can check that the focus is accurate where their eyes are. And because of the converging lines here, it's actually incredibly easy to tell when it's in or out of focus. Another really nice feature of this chart is the 90 IRE white, 40 IRE grey and 20 IRE dark grey chips on the front that allow you, in conjunction with zebras being set in camera, to quickly judge when your image is perfectly exposed. So those are some tips for using these charts within the production process. So actually they're on set or wherever you may be. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go across into our editing suite. We're going to take our footage. We're going to look at how these charts are useful once we get inside the computer, how we can push and pull our colours around and our contrast around to get the most balanced and accurate image that we can. Okay, so I'm going to launch DaVinci Resolve and I'm going to go and first of all show you the colour match feature within Resolve. So first of all, we choose the X-Rite Color Checker Video as our chart type. We line up the grid over the colour chips. We choose our source gamma, S-Log2 in this case, the target gamma being Rec 709, which is a standard HD gamma, and then we hit match. And as you can see, it does a pretty good job. I'll also show you this process manually achieved and how that allows you to be a little bit more accurate with your adjustments. So let's start with exposure. I'm going to move the controls around the 4 different chips in the middle. So we've got the 90 IRE, 40 IRE, 20 IRE and glossy black. Remember the glossy black, because it's glossy, if it's reflecting any kind of light, it can sometimes give you a slightly higher reading than it would do otherwise. So make sure you've got no reflections there. In a completely balanced image, black would be at 0. So that's what I'm going to do first of all. I'm going to bring down my lift brightness so that that bottom chip lines up with the bottom of the chart at 0. I should find that the second chip down, now that's got a reflectance of 18%, that should be falling just below the 384 mark on my waveform scope inside Resolve. Of course, actually the brightest thing in this scene is not the 90% reflectant chip, but the window behind me. So you do need to use a little bit of common sense here, and you have to pull down those highlights or push them up so that your highlight detail, whatever is the brightest thing in your image that should have detail in it, is at the top of the scopes at 1 volt or 100 IRE. So that's what I'm doing here. That's one of the things that I'm able to judge intelligently by doing it this way, whereas the color match feature within Resolve will just push out that detail in the highlights. Now the next thing to do is to just move that mask along and now just focus on the 50% saturation color chips. We have a yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan and green chip, and by isolating them with the mask, only these colors are going to show themselves in my scopes. So I'm going to move over to my vector scope now, and I'm at a 2x magnification, so the boxes for red, magenta, blue, cyan, green and yellow are falling at the appropriate points of saturation. They are known quantities and they should line up with these color chips. With the hue versus hue control, move them so they line up with their chips. The saturation level is of a lesser concern. You can push it up a little bit, but as soon as you start to see those traces starting to look kind of thin and less cohesive, that's your clue that the signal's now starting to break down and you should just rein it in a bit. So, with those colours now accurately pointing and as saturated as I dare push them, I'm now going to remove my mask, and that will essentially apply that primary grade to the whole image. And we can see, spot on, absolutely perfect, very accurate, very repeatable. Doesn't matter how many different scenes I shoot in any location, if I'm using these charts, a standard balanced image like this should be the result of this type of work. I am just going to check my skin tones, and a quick way to do that in Resolve is to use your hue, saturation, luminance qualifier. You just simply drag over whatever colour you are trying to isolate, in this case my skin, so I'm dragging across my face, and if everything is normal and balanced and accurate, then you should find that the skin tones you select will also appear selected as the skin chips on the chart, and you can see here they are bang on. My skin tones and the colour chips, they're all in the same small narrow range. You can see that range on the vector scope following up the skin tone line there. So I've actually got the perfect skin tones. They're absolutely right, and that is a result of both using the white balance side of the chart in production and then using the hue versus hue and hue versus sat controls to manipulate my image to make it as balanced as possible once I'm back in my computer.